All right, good morning everyone. We'll speak up so everybody can hear, but we have an exciting announcement today that relates to offshore wind. And to do that, we'll have Deepwater Vice President Matt Morrissey come on up and lay out the details. But what I want to take a moment just to talk a little bit about the relevance of the industry to New Bedford and some of the work we've done over the years, just to set the table. So, here we are in 2017. Over the last really 5.5 years, we've made a concerted effort to assert New Bedford as the leader in offshore wind in this country. This is an industry that was largely foreign to us in every sense of the word just a few years ago. But it became very clear to me not long after I got into office that this is an industry in which we should put many of our eggs. And it's been a long road, one that's entailed some ups and downs, for instance with the Cape Wind project, but also a number of really high points. The idea is this, though, so it all comes back down to sort of New Bedford's long-term strategic interest. So we've done a great deal of work in economic development, headed up by Derek Santos at the EDC and Ed Washburn at the HDC over the years. And the plans that we have that have been formed by the Regeneration Committee have a focus on New Bedford's assets. For an awfully long time in this city, economic development was a matter of saying, well, that sounds good, that sounds good, that sounds good, as opposed to having an overarching plan that was rooted in what we do very well. We've all said at times that New Bedford has great potential. You've said it, I'm sure every single person here has said it. I'm sure lots of people who are watching this on TV have said it at some point, and I've said it. The reality is that activating that potential requires us to build on our strengths. And our primary strength as a community, and there are many strengths, the downtown and the great infrastructure in the north end, the water connections on the peninsula. But the Port of New Bedford is the reason why New Bedford exists. It's the reason why this entire region of the state exists. And it's the reason why it'll be the basis of our economy for the foreseeable future. So we've gone about focusing on developing this port and all it has to offer. We are the center of the commercial fishing industry on the East Coast and will continue to be so. And number one alone isn't good enough for us. We want to grow from number one. You can't go higher in ranking, but you can still grow, and that's what we want to do. But we also know that we've got to diversify our port, and that's where offshore wind comes in. It's an industry that has been maturing for many years in Northern Europe. It's been around for about 25 years. And they are now, over that course of 25 years, they've reached a point where there are some 84 utility scale wind farms in the North Sea. And the significance of that for us is that it's proof positive that this thing works. When I say this thing, the industry, that it works, that it can create a great deal of jobs and a great deal of opportunity in small and mid-sized ports like ours. And we've seen it with our own two eyes. We've taken the trips to Bremerhaven and Cuxhaven and Esbjerg, and more recently to the Humber region of England, so that people could actually lay eyes on how the industry has taken root and flourished and created job opportunities for the residents of all the cities around those ports. So, and it's all been very deliberate on our part. What we're trying to do is take full advantage of our first mover status. New Bedford has the basics right. So we have close proximity to some of the windiest places on the planet, just south of Martha's Vineyard. The Department of Energy study that we often cite noted that the wind areas south of the vineyard and trailing down the east coast comprise about 25% of the nation's wind reserves. It's just a very, very windy and consistently windy place with fairly shallow water depth. So it is a prime place for offshore wind. We also know that we've got great infrastructure. The terminal behind us is a compelling piece of infrastructure for folks in an industry that involves whose business it is to move very heavy objects. That is a state-of-the-art facility, and it works really well for the industry, and they all know it. And then third, we've got the best seafaring workforce in America, bar none. I mean, none are even close. Our guys know what they're doing on the water, and that too is a selling point. In addition to this infrastructure right here, the hurricane dike makes a huge difference in protecting expensive assets like those vessels, like fishing vessels, like all the other things that we have in the harbor. So we've got that basis, but we also know that there will be other competitors. There will be other ports up and down the East Coast that will want to embrace the industry over time. And they will run all the way down to the East Coast, as far south as Georgia, perhaps. But what we're trying to do is get out in front and the softer ways. In other words, we want to be seen as the center of the industry because we in city government have become versed in this industry, so when business comes here, we can speak the same language and understand their concerns and find ways to make things happen for them here in every way that a business would hope for. But we also know that we need to build a political consensus around the introduction of this industry, and that's what we've been hard at work on. It isn't, this whole thing seems so foreign to people, and especially with the Cape Wind project, downright controversial to some folks. But we believe, and we've taken pains to explain this, that this industry will work well in New Bedford, that it can coexist successfully with the fishing industry and vice versa, very importantly, and that it can create opportunities over a long period of time for our residents. And that's what we're doing. We're in the business of building our economic base here for the long run, not just next year, not just 2 years from now, but 10 and 20 and 50 years down the road, so people can look back at some point and say, you know, they were on top of this, they got out ahead of it, and they made the right decisions for the benefit of the community for the long run. So because like any other new industry, it takes time, this takes time to get off the ground. New Bedford's experienced that before. So the first textile mill in New Bedford was built in 1846. That was the Warm-Sudden Mills. We didn't have another textile mill. The second one wasn't built for more than 3 decades later. It took a while for all of it to take root, but that's okay. I mean, Silicon Valley took 30 or 40 years to take off before it arrived at the point where it's the center of the software industry in the world. So the same can be said for the offshore wind industry. We believe, however, it'll take off faster than it did in Europe, in part because we get to learn from all their mistakes. And when Americans get to a big undertaking, they ramp up really fast. We're usually pretty slow in the beginning, and then we really take off. I think you'll see that happen with the offshore wind industry. So we plot ahead, but we know we're here today because we mark a milestone that is further evidence, very compelling evidence, that this is all becoming very real here. That there will be real investments and real commitment by real well-financed companies to plant their flag right here in New Bedford. And we've seen this all the while. Some of the wind companies have already set up offices here, so that includes Deepwater as well as Vineyard Wind. And we're talking to Ørsted Energy now about that, and there's maybe more to come in that way. But when companies that are this credible say we're going to build here, that makes a big difference. There you can take that to the bank. And so, you know, there's no better person to speak to that, I think, than Matt Morrissey, who is, Matt's a good friend, and in many ways, and I think everybody here knows Matt personally, but I think, you know, the history of offshore wind here in the long run will show that Matt, and I say this somewhat in jest, but I do think it's worth taking literally. Matt has been the offshore wind evangelist. I mean, he seized on the idea of offshore wind a number of years ago and was able to persuade a lot of folks, not just here in Greater New Bedford, but really across the Commonwealth and in other parts of the country, that this wasn't fanciful, that this made sense from a business perspective and from a government perspective. And you know, from his multiple lenses as economic development director and then the first director of the New Bedford Wind Energy Center, he understood precisely what the city was looking for, but he also has a keen sense of what folks in Boston and the legislature as well as private industry are looking for, and how those interests overlap, and how they can all be accommodated and furthered together. So Matt is the ultimate person in bringing together alliances along mutual interests. He's extraordinarily skilled in that way, and what we're doing today is really a byproduct of that in so many ways. So with all that, I want to call Matt up to, who's now, his title is Vice President of Business Development. It's just Vice President of Deepwater Wind, Matt Morrissey. Matt.
Thanks, Greg. Well, thanks everyone. It's a real delight to be here representing the whole team at Deepwater Wind at what is indeed a milestone moment for our company, certainly for the city's efforts and for offshore wind generally in Massachusetts. I want to just start by saying that we are here by, there's no accident why we're here today. This is the result of years of planning, years of partnership, years of advocacy, competition, and an increasingly sophisticated offshore wind market, both in Europe and in the United States. And New Bedford, while it does have all of the attributes the mayor just described, the seafaring workforce, which is second to none, the infrastructure, the proximity to our wind energy area, just as important as those characteristics are the people here. And the partnerships that have been formed under the mayor's leadership over years and years of time that make a company like mine feel very welcome to do business in New Bedford. And I will say it takes a lot of guts if you're an elected official having to run every 2 years to point off to the horizon and say there's something that is in the best interests of the body politic, the city at large, but you can't see it now. And you're not going to see it for years to come. And I'm going to spend some of my precious time and energy and resources in trying to both understand that and then bring that back home. And Mayor, we would not be here today making commitments that are first in the history of the Commonwealth to New Bedford without that leadership. So we sincerely thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
So Deepwater Wind is the United States' leading offshore wind company. We are located, our headquarters is right in Providence, Rhode Island. We have our Massachusetts headquarters just 5 minutes from here. We built and we operate the only offshore wind project, a wind farm in the nation called the Block Island Wind Farm. It's a 30 megawatt project. And over that period of developing and building that project, as a company, philosophically, we did everything we could to bring as much local expertise to the project to ensure we were training local individuals and companies up in the process, and that we could eventually begin to build a regional supply chain, which is critical for the plummeting costs of offshore wind to continue to fall. And we have every intention to do that right here in New Bedford. We are also the company that holds the only 2 offshore wind contracts in America for development of wind farms in other parts along the Atlantic seaboard. We have a 90 megawatt contract that we're in the early stages of development of now to power 90 megawatts into Long Island. And we have a contract that will serve Maryland at 120 megawatts. Now, in Massachusetts, in 2016, working very closely with legislative leaders in the Baker administration, a law was passed making offshore wind the law of the land as it relates to diversifying the energy portfolio in Massachusetts. And that law is colloquially called Section 83D and 83C. 83D is just a wide open Class 1 renewable large scale solicitation where the Commonwealth is looking to buy 1,200 megawatts in a commercial solicitation of any kind of Class 1 renewable energy, solar, hydro, land-based wind, offshore wind, all of that. 83C is the law that essentially, the part of the law that essentially singles out offshore wind because at that stage, just 3 years ago, as the conversations began to really mature, it was felt that offshore wind could not compete with more mature renewable technologies. But costs have fallen, so there's a separate solicitation that's going to be coming out in December for 1,600 megawatts over the next 10 years in chunks to be determined every 2 years until 1,600 megawatts is reached. What's important to note is that over the period of the last 3 years, both because of Deepwater Wind's accomplishment in building successfully on time and on budget America's first offshore wind farm, and the globally depressed, and I mean that in a very positive sense, cost of the supply chain, we realized that we could actually bid into the broader Class 1 renewable solicitation this summer called 83D. We believe that we can compete with compelling prices for our project, Revolution Wind, in that context. And today, Revolution Wind, our base case proposal is to build 144 megawatts, 24 turbines that will power 72,000 homes in the Commonwealth, with a substantial benefit of substantial economic impact locally. And now we're competing against over 50 other renewable energy companies where much of that energy will be coming from far-off places in Canada, Quebec, northern Maine, with huge transmission corridors to bring that power down to where it's needed most. Offshore wind and Revolution Wind will allow power generation to take place just about 35 miles from where we stand right now, utilizing a world-renowned wind resource and creating substantial economic development where our competitors in the solicitation really have very little, if not any at all. So today, we are delighted to announce that for Revolution Wind, we will stage that project right here out of New Bedford, Massachusetts, utilizing the terminal that's sitting just behind us for all of our turbine marshalling requirements. Perhaps as importantly, if not more, today Deepwater Wind is announcing that we are establishing our long-term operations and maintenance facilities out of the harbor here in New Bedford, Massachusetts. To use the terminal, which is without question the finest offshore wind terminal in the United States, if not the Northern Hemisphere, we will pay the Commonwealth approximately $5.5 million per year when we're using the terminal. And we will pay the City of New Bedford's Harbor Development Commission $500,000 a year during construction for the additional port services that the Harbor Development Commission will offer us in the project. So our economic impact analysis of these commitments have indicated that we will see as a result in the region, in the city and in the region, 700 construction jobs during the period that we're deploying the project. We will see 60 permanent direct and indirect jobs associated with operations and maintenance of our wind farm. And then last, we will see in this immediate area an economic impact of $200 to $250 million spread throughout various companies, on the waterfront, off the waterfront. But because so much of the project will be developed through this area, the vast majority of that economic impact will happen in New Bedford. This is just the beginning, as the mayor just articulated. Revolution Wind at 24 turbines is a modestly scaled project. We think modestly scaled projects in the early stages are an appropriate approach to developing a new industry and local talent and local know-how in a new market. We think that modestly sized projects allow us to really involve as many people and stakeholders as we possibly can, particularly in the commercial fishing industry, particularly in the environmental constituencies, tribes. As this industry begins to move forward, we want to make sure we're doing it in such a way that we're actually building it with a lot of people around the table. But this project at 144 megawatts and 24 turbines only represents 20% of our large lease area 35 miles from here. The Deepwater One lease area is 250 square miles in the Northeast. So we have a long way to go as a company, and of course, the mayor sees the longer and larger vision of an industry that's going to be centered here in this city and in this region. Just two more things I want to mention. The first is we are in the midst of an energy replacement cycle in New England. where we will lose over the next 10 years, says ISO New England, we will lose 8 to 10,000 megawatts of existing energy generation capacity. Just down the road, Brayton Point closed, largest coal plant in New England. Brayton Point alone, 1,600 megawatts. And in the southeastern Massachusetts region, that power is now gone. In 2019, we all know that the Pilgrim nuclear power station will go away, shuttering its doors, and that's a loss of 900 megawatts. This is not far-flung academics. The need to replace power that's being lost as a result of not excessively strong green environmental policy, but because these facilities were built 40 and 50 years ago, and the market is indicating they cannot compete with low-cost natural gas, and they cannot be efficient enough to warrant hundreds of millions of dollars in upgrades. So companies in the private market are shutting these facilities down, and as a result, it creates opportunity for large-scale renewables like offshore wind to step in and take a piece of that capacity, not all of it, but take a piece of that capacity. So the market dynamics right now, really more than anything else, is the key driver to why, offshore wind will see over the next 10 years not just the end by virtue of the 1,600 megawatts in Massachusetts being developed, but it will see a new beginning. Because during this period in time, when we see a new industry blossoming in this region, and really in all of southern New England, what we will see is a cost curve of offshore wind coming down dramatically. We're seeing it already. Prices for offshore wind have fallen 40% over the last 5 years. So we will see that continue to fall, and that fall of price is exactly contrasting to the increase in local knowledge base that helps companies like Deepwater Wind build these projects. An increase of enormous proportions in the local economy. So there's a perfect inverse relationship between costs coming down and jobs going up. The last thing I'll say is just to echo what Mayor Mitchell just said, and that is around the historical market context locally. So whether it's whaling, textiles, fishing, these are industries that took 50 years plus to develop and to mature from the inception to the peak of their output. Offshore wind will not take 50 years, but offshore wind will take time. And today marks a very, very important foundational building block that gets this industry in this region jump-started with the selection of Revolution Wind coming up in January. So with that, Mayor, I just want to say thank you for all of your leadership. Deepwater Wind enjoys working with you now as a partner. We will enjoy our future activities together in the months and years to come. Thank you.
Well done. Nice job. All right, thank you, Matt. Well said. And again, it does mark a very significant milestone in our efforts to develop, to cultivate the development of the industry here. And we really appreciate Deepwater's leadership in the United States, and it's already established itself as a pioneer in the industry, having built America's first offshore wind farm off of Block Island, and it's continuing development up and down the East Coast, not just here in Massachusetts, but in Rhode Island and New York and Maryland and wherever else you guys are looking. I'm sure there are other places too. So it's a great day for our city. And look, I mean, just to bring it back to what we're trying to do. So we're sitting here, we can smell the fish in the air, right? So you're in New Bedford when you can smell that, but New Bedford is known as a fishing port because it's not just the fish, not just the harvesting, and it's not just the processing, it's all the other industries that support the industry. I just saw John Liaricos here a moment ago from Sea Fuels. He's a good example of that. It's all the other stuff, including the research at SMAST. And so we have the biggest fishing cluster probably on the planet. And what we're trying to do really is the same with offshore wind. We want offshore wind to have a cluster here. So ultimately that's deployment, it's O&M, as Matt just alluded to, which is operations and maintenance, which means jobs over a long period of time, because when a wind farm is built, the expected lifespan is 20 to 25 years or so. So having an O&M base here counts for a lot. It's manufacturing, and it's training. It's also research, including at SMAST. It's all these things. That's really the goal here, because what we want people to say, as they do already for fishing, so too with offshore wind. If you're in the offshore wind business on the East Coast, you got to be in New Bedford. That's the gravitational pull that we want to establish, and it'll take time, but moments like this matter a lot. I want to note the support of a lot of folks here along the way to get us to that point, because it hasn't just been the private actors. It certainly has not just been the mayor's office or other public officials, but it's been folks from every facet of our community. I mean, I noted Derek Santos's work and continuing work in offshore wind, and his teams, Deb Tromley and others who've been at it all along the way. Our current head of the New Bedford Wind Energy Center, Paul Vigent, who is at it all the time, 24/7, it was almost 24/7. He goes to bed a little bit early, but it's definitely 7 days a week. And networking with industry members, with developing our strategy, we're working on training, doing all the little things that we have to do to establish New Bedford as the center of this place of this industry on the East Coast. Members of the EDC and the Regeneration Committee, Bob Unger, Dave Slutz, Pete Selly, all of you guys, thank you for your support. I want to acknowledge Craig Dutra, of course, from Ørsted Energy, who's here and who we hope is listening very closely, and I know he is. And of course, Buddy Andrade, who, if there's anybody in this community who's been all about broadening opportunity, it's him. And I think I thank you for being here, Buddy, today, because at the end of the day, all this talk about industry strategy and how we cultivate business is really about just giving people an opportunity to buy a home, send their kids to college, and live the American dream. That's what we want in New Bedford. We don't want people leaving New Bedford anymore to look for work. We want people to come here for opportunity, and we're starting to see that now for sure. And these developments only accelerate that trend. So that's really what we're after when you get right down to it. I want to call up. We have a couple of speakers. I want to call up our port director, Ed Washburn, to talk a little bit about the Port of New Bedford's involvement in this. So the commitment by Deepwater to fund port services to the tune of $500,000 during the leasing of the terminal is a significant one, because that'll help us support the industry and support what they're doing here to get those windmills planted out at sea. Ed.
Thank you very much. As the mayor mentioned earlier, we are the #1 fishing port, and we got that way because we were able to diversify in what we land in New Bedford and what we process in New Bedford. So we land dozens of species from across the globe here in New Bedford, but we also process hundreds of species from around the globe. We also understand the importance of diversifying as a port. We land bulk and break bulk cargo here in New Bedford. We have ferries that take hundreds of thousands of people out to the islands from New Bedford. We have a burgeoning recreational boating community in New Bedford, shipbuilding, marine construction, you name it. And we think that offshore wind is going to be a big part of that future. Because of our diversity, we have a vested interest in making sure that the new industries like offshore wind coexist very well with the existing industries like the commercial fishing industry, not just here in the port in terms of land use, but also out on the ocean. And it's very important to make sure that we have the right communication, we have the right interaction with the fishing industry, and that's really where we think the fishing industry can grow alongside an offshore wind industry here in New Bedford. If we can mitigate the concerns ahead of time of the commercial fishing industry, I really do think that the offshore wind industry can have a huge impact on the existing industry here in New Bedford, and it's a really exciting opportunity on all accounts. I also think that that's the key to making the economic impact here in New Bedford as big as we need it to be, is by bringing in existing marine industrial partners and port stakeholders here in New Bedford. So with this host community agreement, we expect to be able to prepare for the additional traffic that the offshore wind industry will bring and Deepwater wind will bring. More assets on the water, additional engagement with port users is a big part of it, but also understanding the land use plans and making sure that we're opening the water sheet to the right marine industrial activities, and finally working very closely with the Wind Energy Center and the Economic Development Council to ensure the business development happens in a way that is most beneficial to the port and to the city of New Bedford. So we're very excited about this opportunity, and we can't wait to get to work.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sid. Before I turn it over to our next speaker, I did want to thank Matt's dad, Jerry Morrissey, for being here today. It's a good moment for him. He's been living with offshore wind for a while, and Jerry, thanks for coming today. If you want to see a Broadway caliber play in the city of New Bedford at very reasonable prices, go to Jerry's production this year. What are you guys doing this year, Jerry? Helen Keller's Miracle Worker. Date? Give me a date.
7 to 10 December.
So a couple of months away, December 7th to 10th. Little free advertising. So get your tickets now because the auditorium's going to fill up. I am not kidding about Broadway caliber. Jerry does a fabulous job running the program. So with that slight commercial note, I wanted to call up. I want to thank, first of all, the support that we've gotten from the City Council. So, you know, industries tend to invest in places where there is political stability, where folks are not necessarily on the same page about everything, and that certainly can be said about the mayor and the city council. But when it comes to economic development and the creation of job opportunity and the support of fishing and offshore wind, the mayor and the city council and the city of New Bedford are emphatically on the same page. So I want to thank every member of the city council for that support. With us today are two council members, both of whom wear two hats here, both of which are relevant. There's Jim Oliveira, who is the soon-to-be erstwhile Ward 1 councilor, who has been a leader on the council on economic development issues and who is also the executive director of the Workforce Investment Board of Greater New Bedford, and Ian Abreu, councilor at large, who is also works at the New Bedford Chamber of Commerce. So both of them have been big supporters of the industry, and I'd ask Jim to come on up and say a few words on behalf of the council and the WIB. Jim.
Thank you very much, Mayor. It's been quite a ride over the last 5.5, 6 years in terms of working with those folks that were advocating for offshore wind. I want to start with my good friend Paul Vigent, who runs the Wind Energy Center now. Paul and I had conversations probably the day that I started working for the WIB about this great venture of offshore wind. He said, "You got to get into this stuff." And over the last 5.5 years, we have gotten into it not only from a city council point of view, where I can honestly say that every time a vote came up trying to put together the Marine Commerce Terminal, the city council supported that 100%. And each and every city council president worked very closely with the administration in order to make that happen. We wanted to be a part of this, and we're happy to be a part of it. And I'm sure that councils that will follow me in the future will also do the same thing. As the Workforce Investment Board Director, though, there's a really heavy vested interest in wind energy. For some of you who may or may not know, wind energy technicians are one of the top fastest growing jobs in the country. And that's important for all of us to know, and for all of us to begin thinking about how do we support that industry. The management at the WIB has been talking among itself, and we believe that we're going to have some really frank conversations with our friends at the Harbor Development Corporation. We've had some frank conversations in the Regeneration Committee meetings, and that the maritime industry sector needs to be a priority sector of our workforce board, and we intend to present that to our board probably for its December meeting. So that being said, there's a lot of work to be done. We have done some of the groundwork, and we intend to work together with all of our partners to align all of our educational resources in the community so that we will support wind energy and our people will get their fair share of jobs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Jim. So, so one of the things that folks need to understand, and Matt alluded to, is that it does take time for the industry to get off the ground. We're not going to see windmills at this site for a few years still. There's still a big ramp up in terms of site work, and you see some of the surveying vessels that go out to sea and study the ocean floor in the areas where these things are to go. There's permitting to be done both at the state and federal level, but it's all running forward, and so this is a day in 2017 that people will look back and say that was a big step forward for New Bedford, and so we're very proud of it. And I want to thank everybody here who's played a role, large or small, along the way. There are more good things to come, and I really want to thank Deepwater and Matt personally for their leadership. With that, I'll open it up to questions. My first question is, what's going on behind me that everybody's looking at?
I think they're waiting for us, I think. With the new industry coming here, and we're talking about all these potential jobs, an economic boost to other sectors of the city, how many jobs can New Bedford residents think, potentially have here? People that already live in the city, especially since they're probably not trained on any of this stuff. Is there going to be opportunity for them to come learn and actually New Bedford residents benefit from the job creation?
Yeah, so there are a number of questions there, all good ones, Josh. So because there is going to be a ramp up, because there is a time between now and when the work will actually begin, there will be opportunities to do that. Jim touched on it a little bit, and if you want to add anything, Jim, please do so. But in general, workforce training has been a big part of the planning process here, involving the WIB, involving Bristol Community College, involving the unions, involving New Bedford Voc Tech. So there are some programs already in place, and we know that we won't have to reinvent the wheel because, as Paul Vigen, who knows more about job training in this industry than anybody, will tell you, there are both training programs for land-based wind that exist in a number of places around the United States, many of which are run by community colleges, and there are offshore wind training centers already established in Europe, and we've taken a really close look at it. Paul could give you a chapter and verse on that. So we will be in a position to train people up to satisfy the needs of every facet of the industry. Is that about right?
That's as clear as you can be right now.
Yeah.
Understand this, that there are still many people that are on the sidelines looking for work and looking for training. With the limited amount of federal dollars that we have to get pretty innovative, and we've been working with the state over time to develop training programs and apply for grants through numerous offices like the Department of Career Services and the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. We intend to be as aggressive as we possibly can be to find additional funds as the picture becomes clearer regarding the needs for the types of positions that are going to be available that will yield full-time, year-round work. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's a great question. Anybody else? Jeanette, anybody? All right, very good. Thanks for being here today. This is a historic moment.